We are live. Thank everyone for joining us today. We'll give it a couple minutes. Just let everyone flow into the space.
So Kyle, Tracy, was Coach Chaney, was he ill? Like, was this unexpected or?
So I talked to so my relationship with Coach Chaney is really interesting because of course, going to Chaney, when I coached with the men's team there, I coached with guys who played for him there. So I used to work his basketball camps and things like that. So I called one of my mentors who played for him. He said, Coach, they were just on a call with Coach Saturday.
Oh, wow.
They was all on a Zoom coach with Coach Saturday. He turned 89 last Tuesday. But they haven't disclosed. They said, the media has said that he an undisclosed illness.
Okay.
But I don't know. He's been in a wheelchair for probably the last 3 years. And then he was having he started to have some issues with his eyesight probably the last 5 years.
Okay.
So
Again, thank y'all for joining us today, part 2. See everyone's flowing into the space. I want to give it 30 more seconds. We're going to jump right into a necessary discussion today, and really hope to bring out some more of the literature from I Came as a Shadow. Very timely read. So about 10 seconds, we'll go ahead and get started. All right, Coach Adams, let's get it going. Dr. Gill, you ready?
Yes, sir.
Let's go ahead and get started.
good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to part 2 of The Luxury of, a discussion around the transformative autobiography of Coach John Thompson, entitled I Came as a Shadow, with Jesse Washington. We want to thank everyone who's taken some time from their day to get on this call. We want to thank everyone who was with us last week for just the great discussion from you all and from our panelists. Today on our call, we have Dr. Emmett Lee Gill. We have Tracy A. Jones, and myself. I am Kyle Adams. We are today's call is really interesting on the back of the passing of Coach John Thompson. I'm sorry, Coach John Chaney, one of Coach Thompson's comrades in arms. As you can see the graphic, Coach Thompson was the presenter for Coach Chaney going into the Hall of Fame. And he was someone who was very involved with the founding of the Black Coaches Association in the early 90s. We've lost, over the last 6 months, we've lost 2 pillars in the coaching community, 2 outstanding educators. Before we jump into the book, Dr. Gill, please and Tracy, please share some thoughts, some remarks just on Coach John Chaney.
You want to hit it? I mean, I gotta make sure I'm off mute. Can you hear me, everybody? Yeah, I think you know, it's funny because Coach Chaney came to one of Coach Stringer's practices, and I've never seen so many curse words used when trying to teach somebody how to set a screen. But you know, Coach Chaney just sort of demanded this respect. And he was just so passionate. You know, you could tell that he was a born educator. You know, and you know, some of the things that Coach Chaney did, you know, I can remember the incident with John Calipari, you know, his role with the Black Coaches Association. You know, he was just authentic, you know, in what he did. And he may not, to the naked eye, have been as calculated, you know, maybe as Coach Thompson, I don't know. But, you know, just the things that he did, they had such a great impact. And, you know, you can always, in my opinion, you can tell a lot about a person by the way their team plays, you know, and his teams were fierce. You know, I used to love watching, you know, Mark making play. You know, I used to, you know, love watching his teams play. So he'll be missed, and I hope we find different ways to carry on his legacy.
Yeah, I think Coach Chaney, just not being from the Philadelphia area, but residing in there through college and most of my adult life, played a significant role in just the structure and the resources that were provided to the grassroots level. And I think that his influence, always kind of just pulling up that chair at a baseline or just popping into a gym and having discussions with those in the ecosystem, really helped. I think, you know, for Philadelphia, he did not get the credit that he deserved, nor did he get the flowers during his time, considering what he did. I thought a lot of times his success was determined based on his win-loss record or, you know, their performance. Very little was really highlighted about the type of man he was during the summer. You know, it was always about who's going to replace Coach Chaney. We need somebody to come in here and be a national contender, but not thinking about what he meant to North Philly and the stability that he provided outside of the game. And so one of the things that, you know, I love about Coach Thompson, me being from the DMV, and then, you know, during my formative years of being in Philly, you seeing Coach Chaney, these are two men that were educators at the core and could care less about a win-loss record. They know they needed to win to keep their job, but the most important thing was, how can I help that Black athlete? I can care about anything else. And if you look towards the tail end of his career, some of the athletes that he ended up recruiting at Temple weren't the top 20 in the city, right? But he was still giving opportunities for those young men to get education. And so beyond win losses, I think he's definitely a pillar, or was a pillar, in the Philadelphia community.
Just really briefly, I think, you know, one of the things that really stands out to me about Coach Chaney and a Coach Thompson is they viewed their position as a head coach at their institution as really being community engagement entities. They use their basketball programs to engage the community, you know, just as much as they were about winning basketball games. They were committed to lifting that community. And they thought that the college being in the community should be an extension of that. You know, Coach Chaney had over 700 wins. But the thing that I've always been most impressed about his career, in 1979, the state system of higher education in Pennsylvania, while he was coaching at Chaney, bestowed him the Distinguished Faculty Award for outstanding teaching. And you know, those two men, they scream educator to me. They scream it being bigger than just a ball, and how, you know, them being in those roles, they saw that they, you know, not just the players that they were coaching, but entire communities. And, you know, I recognize that we have to, you know, I talk about all the time, hey, where are the coaches like Coach, I've talked to you, Dr. Gill and Tracy, where are the coaches like Coach Cheney and Coach Raveling and Coach Thompson and Coach Stringer? And, you know, waiting on these great messiahs, waiting on somebody to come save us. And I recognize that we have to be that. We have to be the carriers and bearers of their legacy and moving the work that they've done forward. So I, you know, salute to Coach Cheney.
Definitely. And so again, welcome all. We'll definitely give others in the room an opportunity to also elevate some of their thoughts on Coach Cheney, as well as the literature that we'll be discussing today. We want to be mindful of your time, so we're going to, you know, just set the room with some discussion norms, really reorient the conversation around the statement luxury of that Coach Thompson made in the book. And then our discussion today is really going to hammer home on just the opportunities that are afforded to Black coaches, right? And really talking about the perceived opportunity for Black coaches in today's landscape. For our dialogue today, again, we're just here to elevate the text, talk more as a huddle. We don't want to have any promotions. So when we elevate you to the stage, please save your titles and affiliations for LinkedIn. Just come up. Let's continue to stay on the topic. Let's talk about solutions and really share and swap the perspective of each other in this space on this Sunday, just to really create and cultivate change. And I came as a shadow. Coach Thompson, like many, he shares a statement that says the luxury of. He says, I never had the luxury of just being a basketball coach. I felt a deep responsibility to use the coaching occupation to open up broader opportunities for Black people. I didn't have the luxury of not thinking about it because I've always been haunted by my past. And so for those that didn't join us for part one, again, this is the statement that really was a call to action to the three of us on the screen, as well as Coach Sutton and Coach Curry, who are also a part of the team in creating this 4-part discussion around the I Came as a Shadow, because none of us in this space have the luxury of being a coach, a mental health expert, a grassroots organizer, or just a fan. Our Blackness has called us to a greater calling. Our Blackness has called us to greater work rather than just solely identifying as members of the athlete ecosystem. And so with that, this is the framework of the discussion that we'll be, you know, really kind of diving into today. In part 2 of the book, for I Came as a Shadow, and for those that have not read it yet, don't worry, please still stay on. You'll still be able to engage in the conversation. We'll be able to kind of go back and forth and share in perspective. But there were 3 quotes in part 2 of I Came as a Shadow that really jumped out to us and made us think about the coaching opportunity for Black coaches in the current system. And so when this first quote popped up, some white people will accept a relationship with Blacks only if they are in a superior or teaching role. We immediately thought about the pipeline. The current pipeline, how it's set up now, this is what that quote really highlights. The second part so from the pipeline, you have 1 or 2 options, the afforded and the multitude. And so the multitude you can see within the profession, and this is when things can't get any worse. That's when they give us a chance. And so for most coaches, this is the chance Most black coaches, they get a chance when all else seems in peril. And then the afforded. When Coach Thompson won his championship in '84, he said, he made it very clear, I don't want to come off as being grateful for this, because I'm thinking about everyone else that didn't have the opportunity. And yes, I am the first black coach, but I was the first black coach afforded the opportunity to do so. And so we'll open up with Coach Adams and Dr. Gill. Let's talk about the thought process right now that's facing our black coaches in light of these three quotes, but in today's environment, when you just see, the NFL coaching cycle, and you see our day in and day out NCAA coaching carousel, where the black coaches are afforded the opportunities within that multitude category.
Dr. Gill, please.
Yeah, Tracy, I mean, I'll just really go back to what you said earlier about, in particular the college ranks, when coaches are afforded opportunities because, the programs, at a breaking point, or the programs under NCAA violations, or the program just, really isn't living up to the standards of the AD or the boosters or whatever the case may be. And when I think about that, I think about the University of Missouri, and I think about, Quanzo Martin. And I think about, prior to Quanzo getting there, and I'm not sure who the coach was before him. It might have been Quinn Snyder. It may not have been.
No.
But I can remember.
Yeah.
Who was it?
It was a guy who was an alum. I don't recall his name, but it wasn't Quinn Snyder. But they were coming off the back of some violations. Right.
Yeah. They were coming off the Ricky Clemens.
Right.
A lot of stuff had happened under Quinn Snyder's, reign, and then, Quanzo was called to come in. He had the opportunity to come in and sort of clean up the program. And, that was, sort of clearly stated. I think he understood. I think the school understood it, and I think the blessing now is that, you look at that Missouri program and, it's flourishing. He's had an opportunity. He's been extended, a certain amount of grace that I think is uncharacteristic, of Black coaches right now. I was surprised when both he and Shaka, even, Mike Boykin, at Oklahoma State, I'm really surprised that, pleasantly surprised, that these athletic directors are sticking with them. But it really is unfortunate, because you don't have the luxury, of being just a coach. And so, I think the other part of it, and we talked about it sort of in our pregame a couple of days ago, is that then you look at the flip side of it, and you look at what white coaches, have or don't have to do. And basically, they have the luxury of being a basketball coach, because oftentimes they'll pull in somebody like a Jay Lucas, who's going to do all the recruiting, who's going to go into the homes, who's going to handle all those situations. They hire somebody to do that. But when you're a Black coach, you're responsible for that. You're responsible for living in a couple of different worlds: the donor world, the fundraising world. And then, again, I think Coach Thompson really alluded to it several times, again in his book out, when you're a 6'10", 6'11" Black man, I mean, one of the interesting things is when I had an opportunity to watch John Thompson and Patrick Ewing walk through the lobby of a Final Four, I'm like, man, y'all are some big Negroes, seriously. And so, even just with his stature, is he had to be so many different things, and some just didn't fit his personality, but he was still able to accomplish that. So, just a lot of thoughts when I think about it, but mostly, I think about the flip side of what Coach Thompson said, and it's how much he's judged on versus, some of the white coaches that he competed, against. It's a tough thing.
Yeah, and Coach Adams, if you could follow up to that, just in your perspective, former coach, now on the outside doing consulting, what are your thoughts on the current state of the pipeline for Black coaches?
Well, it's really interesting because when we talk about Coach Thompson, in the statement, I didn't have the luxury to just be a basketball coach. You think about that statement in the terms of Coach Thompson played in 3 Final Fours, right? Like that's pretty good for somebody that didn't focus everything on basketball. And he made a statement in an interview where he talked about how can we as people, how can we as coaches see what's going on in our communities and just focus on trying to win a national championship. So for me to I think a lot about how he saw his role is so much more than a basketball coach. He saw himself as a community leader, as a change agent. And, Coach Thompson, Coach Raveling, Rudy Washington, all, these coaches of that time saw themselves and saw the role and the position that they held at these institutions is so much more. And we don't see that to the extent that we did at that time. And I think a lot of that stems around the finances of what goes on, right? You talk about the pipeline, I don't want to make too much noise because I want to continue to ascend on the pipeline or the conveyor belt so I can continue to get at a higher level institution. I can make more money. I can have more visibility. But who pays for that on the other side of that? For me to be able to ascend and to move up this ladder, there's some collateral damage. And I struggle at times because I saw Coach Thompson, Coach Chaney, and those coaches. I saw them making a way for those behind it. With them founding the BCA, they were really committed to creating something that could help to develop coaches. And I don't know that we have those same mechanisms to the same extent today. A lot of the organizing that you see around coaching today is around getting a job. It's not around making things better for student athletes or being able to impact the institution at a more holistic level, or being able to do work and connect those kids in your program with kids in the neighborhoods or communities that they come from, right? So really, I question at times are where we're at as it pertains to the coach as an educator. The coach as having an established pedagogy and philosophy about how they're not just going to win basketball, they're commit to being an influencer and change agent in the communities in which they come from, and which those kids come from. Because I think the other thing that we saw with college football, we saw people who recruit young people to come to institutions and have totally different stances on what's going on in our country socially, right? And I don't know, Mason's 8. I don't know if Mason's going to be able to go play for somebody who doesn't have any level of concern for him, or to a greater extent, the communities that he comes from. So I think those are some of the things that I question at times as far as what are the motivations around coaches. It has to be more than just getting jobs.
Yeah.
And Dr. Gill,
I'm sorry, Jay. I just want to add something to what Kyle said. You know, it's one thing, you know, for Coach Thompson, Coach Chaney, Coach Washington, etc., to want to play different roles and to be an educating coach. It's another thing to be able to go out and execute. And they execute. You know, that's totally different. And I think that's why what they did, you know, is so very impressive. And it's just interesting because, you know, a lot of these coaches, and particularly these white coaches, you know, when COVID came down, it was all about, well, you know, these kids are safer here than they are in their communities. But hold up, them communities was fine when you was going to recruit them. You ain't had no problem with them communities then. But now all of a sudden they unsafe. And what are you doing about that? And so I think Kyle is spot on in the sense that, you know, even when Coach Chaney, Coach Thompson, and others created the Black Coaches Association, and Kyle and Coach Sutton sent me a video, you know, it was all about, part of the reason was we can't even go into the communities in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., you know, where we were born and raised and live, and talk to the kids without it being a recruitment violation.
Dr. Wright.
Hey, good afternoon, folks. Again, appreciate this this forum, this dialogue. Again, on my wife's computer, and I forgot she got this background going on, but it's all good. My concern, well, I guess my thoughts about the sort of pipeline is faceted in several ways, where the Black coaches have I don't want to say a burden, but it's just, you know, what we do and then what we had to do in all professions. And I just think you guys are alluding to these gentlemen being educators. And as an educator, I think about not only educators, preachers, physicians, physicians, dentists in our community wear multiple hats and do many things. You're the nurse, you're the counselor, mentor, father, as we pointed out last week. So some coaches sort of have to make that decision of what they want to do, and great coaches often know that they have to carry and be all those things. Now, it's unfortunate that some coaches don't have to do those things, but as great coaches, great leaders, I would just say put this in leadership, period, in any industry, that we do all these things. And in particular, when you're dealing with students of color or athletes of color, you have to have that sort of cultural competence. That's one of the buzzwords that sort of went around in education. But as coaches, you have to have that cultural competence to be able to go in and out of communities and different arenas. I remember one of my advisors up at Kutztown should say, you have to be sort of bilingual and be able to work boardrooms, but also work the neighborhoods and the streets as well. And then connecting with kids. And I'm glad you raised the Brother Gill about the COVID situation, because a lot of these kids are feeling alone, not unable to go home, and coaches and school administrators in general have to be sensitive that these kids haven't been able to go home, haven't been able to see their family, but they have to be there to run ball. And they said, well, what do you do? One of my good friends, coaches over at Ryder, and he was like, had to convey to his, coach that, hey, we have to, support these kids. And like you mentioned, is this a violation? So I'm glad that the NCAA has been sort of somewhat relaxed in allowing kids to, go to the coaches' homes to have meals, because they don't have family to go to, and they're just sort of unable to do that. So coaches have to, good coaches, I would say, often carry go above and beyond. And it used to say you have to be twice as good. So you're doing these things that make you twice as good, connecting with these kids, because the parents are entrusting, some parents are entrusting you as the guardian over this child. So they put a lot of trust that they send their kids, away from their home to this strange place, and you're sort of the conduit for the family and the child, so that they feel comfortable being at a place that's away from home. So I think you have to good coaches, good teachers, good leaders carry that burden, because that's what we've done historically in our community, the leadership in any profession.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you for that. Thank you
All
for
right.
that. And I just want to back to Coach Adams and Dr. Gill. On our pre-call, we talked about there's a certain level of conditioning that comes along with this pipeline, right? And so reading again, some white people will accept a relationship with Blacks only if they're in a superior teaching role. And this conditioning that goes with our athletes and both Black coaches in this space then has a detrimental effect on their ability as professionals in other workplaces. And Dr. Gill, I'm going to come to you first about, and Dr. Wright said it as well, about this burden,
Yeah.
right? If I'm dealing with this burden, how am I truly able to advance up this ladder, right? Like, what does it end up? What's the toll that this burden ends up weighing on me?
I mean, I think Dr. Wright hit it on the head. When he said burden, I was like, yep. Because, I transparent, right? I couldn't deal with the burden in working in college athletics. I'm gonna be who I'm gonna be. And some of this stuff, I can try and deal with. I'm gonna try and look the way on some of the other things. I'm gonna try and work behind the scenes on the other things. But to Dr. Wright's point, for me, sort of the burden is the mental health or the wellness implications when right versus wrong. When well, I need to withhold this kid from this game because he hasn't gone to class. But if I withhold him from the game, it might cost me the game. Which one is more important? And if I don't, my commitment are to these young Black and white and other young men. And, that's got to be incredible to deal with when, you have to sort of win ball games, when you want to advance, up the pipeline. It's incredible. But Coach Thompson was remarkable, like you said, in the sense that he could deal with his burdens, deal with his responsibilities, but also meet his obligations as a great basketball coach who made it to 3 different Final Fours. But I can't imagine, and he got pretty deep in his book with some of the things that tugged at him, including the toll that him being in this basketball coach had on his family. That's a burden as well, because you have this strong Black man who's being taken away. What, he had 3 sons?
And a daughter.
2 sons and a daughter.
2 sons and a daughter, and he's not in the household because of what college basketball and college sports has required. So when I think about it, Tracy, I just think about, the pull between the basketball world and your personal, cultural, family world, and being the competitor that you are. You want to do well here, but you have this obligation here, and he was sort of able to handle that, whether it was in interactions with the president, whether it was interactions with what's his name, Rafa Edmonds. He was able to, go between those different worlds and balance the burdens that come with both of those things, with all of those different worlds.
So Coach Adams, then on the flip, as some have mentioned in the chat, Shout out to Monique, Seeds of Empowerment. Talk about the blessing, right? The blessing of being afforded the opportunity to serve these scholars as well as institutions.
Well, I think it's framing, and it's two things. It's framing and modeling, because Dr. Gill shared about the burdens that, coaches deal with, but there are a lot of other perceived burdens that coaches have, when you coach at, say, a low resource institution, or, you don't have the same level of athlete that another team in your conference has, or you don't have the same scholarship monies, right? But I think when you kind of change your framing and how you view it, and really look at these perceived burdens as opportunities to be creative, to think, to the term, you hear the term low resource institution, and I don't believe in low resources. There's just low resource people, right? If you can't take advantage, Doc, you and I have talked before about, some schools don't have student athlete development, centers, but they got a counseling department on campus, psychology major on campus, right? So it's really more about looking, using your fuller capacity to think and be creative, and recognizing that you've been placed in this role for a reason, and you got to figure it out. But what that does is, how powerful of an image is that for your student athletes, for your staff, for them to see you take what are perceived burdens and make them work and make the best out of them. So I really just believe it's a mind shift, and there are so many coaches. You talk to coaches all the time, and they complain, they want to get out of this level. I don't want to coach at this level. If I'm coaching in the MEAC, I'm trying to get out. But really embracing the unique and beautiful opportunity that you have to work with this group of student athletes, this group of administrators, that have been placed for you to lead. And I think Dr. Wright spoke about all this that we're talking about stems back from coaching to educators leadership. And Coach Thompson was, a grade A leader, who was an elevated thinker, of great foresight. So I think it's choices. We either make a choice to look at what we deal with as a burden, or we can view it as a blessing.
Yeah, and with that blessing side, so in this part two of the chapter, or part two of the book, Coach Thompson speaks about the importance of helping his athletes understand what's going on in the world. And so one of the quotes that he says, because he's afforded this opportunity to do so, he knows basketball is an instrument. And he tells his players, far more money is made sitting down than standing up. I told them I always hammered home the point that they had to make something more of themselves than as athletes, and the only way to do that was education. You're not a basketball player. I told them, you play basketball. During Black History Month, I gave them a 2-hour lecture breaking down the legacies of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. It might have been 3 hours. I don't know. I was on a roll. I encouraged them to question conventional wisdom. When I blew the whistle at practice, I might curse out Michael Jackson about the defense we were supposed to be running, or I might ask David Wingate what happened in Iran today. Mm-hmm. And so Dr. Gill, and Coach Adams, I'll come to you first, because I know when you were at Cheney, this was something that you often did with bringing the desk into the gym and having a circle, aka a huddle up with your lady hoopers at Cheney. Speak about the importance of infusing that education in those spaces, and why it's important, adding on to that blessing, why it's important for us to not be disconnected from what's going on in the society and speaking about it from the lens of a Black person.
Well, I really believe that another opportunity, you have a captive group of young people for a certain amount of time every day. And if all they left you with was how to set a screen or how to sit in a defensive stance, then you cheated them. And it was important for us, and it'll always be important to me that we dedicate some portion of our day to talk about what's going on. We call it the confidence circle. And we would come in and we do different exercises. But the other thing that was really important in that was for me not to be always in the role as guru, for me to facilitate the environment and set it, and then step out and become part of the educated. Because I think it's important that, one, yes, you as the coach, as the leader, as the educator, you share different information, but also it provides you an opportunity to let them educate each other and for them to share the things that they've learned, that they've been seeing with one another, right? As a way to kind of enhance and elevate each other. And then you start as a student athlete, you start to see yourself being vested in your teammates' growth and development. We call it buddy teaching, right? If we working on shooting the basketball, we do form shooting. We're going to work on form shooting one time, and we're going to talk to you about what you need to be looking for. Now, when we break and you guys are at baskets, coaches don't need to be coaching the young you guys on it. You need to, hey, Kyra, you need to come up off your heels need to leave the ground. Keep your elbow in. Now you create an environment where they're teaching one another, right? And then that carries over to when they're on games. You're on a foul line, and you know that Kyra struggles with her heels leaving the ground. So when you step to the line, Kyra, make sure your heels up. And that's not something that has to come from a coach, right? So I think it's vitally important, because what that does is it allows them to see the importance. Because I think we're all educated. We're either teaching people what to do wrong or what to do right. And if we're conscious of it, we can create breakthroughs, not just from coach to player, but peer to peer, player to player. So, in the every day of the beginning of practice, every day we would be on a board. I always had a board in practice. We'd have a quote of the day, which would allow one of the ladies would read the quote, and then we had to discuss what the quote meant to them. And it gave them an opportunity to articulate themselves. It gave them an opportunity to utilize their public speaking. So you could see a young lady who was really shy and introverted at the beginning of the year be much more confident in herself by the end of the year when she's reading a quote and has to share the meaning of it. And that did a lot to help our young ladies build their inner self-worth and confidence and see that same confidence in one another. So I didn't mean to take up that time, but I think to listen to Coach Thompson create those type of experiences for his student athletes, it added a level of validation to kind of how I believe that you do this thing.
Yeah. I mean, I can't add that much because my coaching resume only includes 11-year-old AAU and under. But we used to go into the gyms in South Carolina. I only had one African American player, but I'm gonna tell you something. We played man one man all game, and we did some things. So my coaching resume is sort of limited. But my question is, how many coaches do you think talked about George Floyd and police-involved shooting, prior to George Floyd or prior to Breonna Taylor? How many coaches do you think, went in and talked about the insurgents on January 6th on the Capitol? Coach Thompson talked about things that were happening internationally and domestically. And there's so many things domestically, that men's basketball and women's basketball players in particular need to have a conversation about. And it goes to Coach Adams' point, because one of the things that I learned as an instructor is sometimes in my classes, I will have students talk in dyads, just 2 people. And then you might talk in groups of 5 people. And then we open up the conversation to the entire class. Because some kids aren't gonna, some kids don't have the best public speaking skills and want to work on it. They're shy, they're not used to talking in class. And so, what folks like Coach Thompson, Coach Adams are giving kids an opportunity to do is just that, practice your public speaking skills, feel comfortable in terms of talking with your peers, and be astute in terms of things that are going on in our country, and I would suspect that, a lot of the conversations that Coach Thompson had with his players were just about life, like how to survive. Like, how many white coaches talk about when you get stopped by a police officer, 10 and 2, and don't reach for the dashboard unless you ask for permission. Don't talk back, and you will fight. If you feel that you have a case, then you argue that case in court, not in your car. These are just some of the fundamental things that we have to have conversations about. And some of the better coaches that I've been around, they take time to have these conversations. But Tracy, it goes back to that burden. Like, when you got a big game coming up, are you thinking about talking about the insurgents? When you got donors who are coming to practices, are you, and something just went down on campus, are you willing to have that conversation when you've got donors who are observing your practice, or your AD is in there? So again, folks like Cheney, Thompson, Stringer did these things, but they didn't do them in a vacuum. They did them with all of these other things swirling around their profession that they didn't have the luxury to ignore, because if they did, they know they weren't being true to who they are. Not only who they are, who their families are, who their communities are. So again, I just look at this and I'm just amazed, because, it's really hard to do these things, and continue to be successful, but continue to rise up the pipeline, and there are just so many. I mean, I even think about, what I think about? I think about how many coaches I've watched, and they talk about how communication is so important on the court. How are you going to be able to communicate on the court, and you can't even sit here and communicate when we're sitting down, talking? Like, I was watching a game last night. I think it was the Celtics and the Lakers, and I think Jaylen Brown was mic'd up, and they were just talking about how he was communicating with his players. But yet, a lot of coaches don't have these very basic conversations where you sit down and you have some time to think and communicate. And then they think, well, they're supposed to get out there on the court, and the only thing they're supposed to communicate is help side defense, or, this particular action or that particular action. And so, again, just really amazing to all the coaches who, take the time to have these conversations with their players.
Coach B, welcome.
Thank you.
Coach B.
Hello to all the coaches on the panel and all the coaches in the chat. Tracy posed a question in the chat that I just wanted to hop on real quick and answer. You asked about the conversations that we're having with our student athletes beyond the court. And I also put in the chat that I feel like Black coaches have an innate responsibility to address issues outside of basketball. Whereas for white coaches and non-Black coaches, they might do it, but it's a choice. They get to opt in and out of it. I don't feel like we don't have that choice. And I was saying that's why Black coaches are a necessity. When you're operating from a place of moral obligation, there's a lot more weight and substance to what you're speaking. There is no other option. You don't want to see your Black men or Black women in situations that, had you had one extra conversation with them, couldn't have been avoided. Again, whereas a white or non-Black coach, they don't see that because they didn't grow up being watched or lurked. They didn't grow up with that level of super consciousness that we have to just to live. We don't get to look at the sport as a way to elevate our careers or a way to attain fame or fortune. For a lot of us, it truly is a means of survival. And for a lot of us that have succeeded or quote unquote made it out, we feel like we have to continue whoever reached out to us, because many of us had somebody reach out to us. And then I'll offer this because I coach young girls. I, as a Black woman, am the only person that's capable of having intracommunal conversations with my young girls about gender dynamics, about sexism that's present in education, that's present in our own communities. A white coach, even a white woman, cannot talk to young Black girls about how to demand respect from their male counterparts. And so again, we're able to have conversations that the kids can look at us and know that we've been there, that they can trust us, they can know that we are motivating them to be better people, to experience wins in life, not just wins on the court. I think that you said it, Coach Gill, last week, you do have to win in order to be heard and respected. But I think what Coach Thompson was talking about was like, that's truly just the beginning. We don't get to win and let that be it. I feel like that's the beginning of a lot of our legacies, for people to begin hearing us the way that white coaches are automatically heard. We don't get to step into the court, have the title of coach, and be respected and heard. We have to succeed. We have to overcome a number of obstacles to then get the respect that coaches in their early 30s or haven't had any kind of like career building as we've had are able to achieve. So I just wanted to share that with y'all, coming from my particular perspective.
Thanks, Coach B.
Hey, can I ask a question to Coach B right quick? Can I?
Go ahead, Doc.
Go ahead.
Like, Coach B, like, who are your coaching role models right now?
That's a great question.
That's a great question. I love Dawn Staley, of course. I love Carolyn Peck, who I think she had a short stink at, I don't know if it was Purdue or Vanderbilt. I also love Purdue. I also love Coach Nikki McCray. I'm a great fan of hers. I love the coach at Ole Miss. I'm not quite sure. I think it's
Yolette Hume.
Yeah, Yolette. And then I also love the coach at Georgia. I think her name, I forget her name as well. But there's a lot of young Black women coaches that coach from that innate passion that I can identify it. And a lot of other coaches, you cannot acquire it, you can cultivate it. And it's really inspirational, especially in the, I believe it's SEC. I get my conferences mixed up because these teams are switching left and right. But to be on a high school level and see that happening at the college level is extremely inspirational. And then I do want to talk about what you all were saying with opportunity. How unfortunate is it that we live in a world that our genius has to be identified, scrutinized, and then selected amongst our peers in order to get a chance? And then it's a chance in which there's already a dismal standing, or it's we make one or two quote unquote mistakes and it's a wrap. And our kids are looking at that, and our kids are interpreting that as, I better be perfect, I better walk the line, or I'm going to be cast aside. And a lot of times I think that people think that Black coaches have a soft part. It's you lose, you lose or you lose again. If you're too hard, right, you're telling your kids that they're disposable. If you're too soft, you don't know how to discipline kids, you don't know how to get them on the straight and narrow. So sorry, that's a long answer, but again, I love Dawn Staley. I love all the Black women in the SEC right now.
Oh, that's awesome. I got lots of questions, but
Yeah, I'll just pose another question just while, because there was something that came in the Q&A, and Coach B, you kind of alluded to it in regards to the identifying of talent early, right? And so we speak a lot about coaching, but we know from a coaching side, and Dr. Gill, you mentioned it with funders, you know, coaches are hired by the ADs and some of the external parties as well. Like, what are the conversations with some of our athletes in regards to understanding that there are other positions within the ecosystem, such as AD, consultant, trainer, to make sure that they know we're not kind of being narrowly focused on just being on the court, but also calling the shots within administrations. Anyone can jump at that.
Kyle, I'll let you say, because, you know, as a mental health professional, you know, who's worked with, you know, whether it's Rutgers, whether it's NCCU, you know, UTSA, you know, University of Texas, I'm assuming a lot of those take place, those conversations take place in the locker room, not on the court. You know, because again, a lot of the coaches that I work with have a lot of open, you know, opportunities. Now, I can't remember a couple of conversations that the CBS had with her ladies, but I'll leave that up to Kyle and Coach B.
Coach B.
Yeah, so I'm gonna share some things that I don't know. A few people know. I see Dave Hargrove is here, and he's, you know, a coach at Imhotep and a companion of mine. I'm gonna be blunt. I coach at West Catholic, white school leadership. There was a huge disconnect between my leadership and their understanding of leadership. It infuriated me. A lot of people do not know the stories. I do plan to share them, but I think you can exercise authority and show your kids the right to stand up for themselves and each other in the face of incompetent white leadership. I'm just going to say it. And a lot of these white leaders that speak authoritatively over Black life are doing them a grave disservice when they try to chop at the knees of Black leaders that know what they're doing, that know how to tap into community, that know how to respect their parents and guardians' wishes, their AAU coaches' wishes, their priests, their pastors, their imams. White people do not operate that way. We operate as a community more often than not. They operate as individuals. So I think even just standing up for your kids, I can give an example. When I was first building my program, we lacked chemistry. We lacked solidarity. So I told them, if you see a teammate that's getting picked on, stand up for her. You will not get in trouble with me. So they got detentions with their teachers. We got a rep as being like the difficult clique on the team, but I saw a visible unification of my kids. And my discipline or acceptance of their behavior meant more to them than their teachers, than the merits. Their parents came to me to say, was this teacher right or wrong? I didn't achieve that just by walking into the gym. I had to ask their parents, if they don't make their bed, if they don't wash the dishes, if they don't babysit a kid, their little sibling the way you want them to, let me know. So then parents are able to come to me. So again, I feel like us just showing up as we are and believing in ourselves and believing in the people that poured into us, the kids are watching and they're not dumb. They see that these white leaders don't know how to connect to them, but want them to behave in a way that's going to get them more money or get them just whatever awards they're looking for. And it's a shell of the leadership that our kids deserve.
And I would add to that, going back to the quote, right? He says more money will be made sitting down than standing up. And I think there is a gross negligence throughout the youth pipeline to show after you play, they just think you go to coach, right? There's not really like that link of saying after you play, here are some of the other opportunities to stay within the game if you want to, or veer off that path, because we're not really understanding how the ins and outs of the money goes, and we just see, you know, what's visible to us is coach, player, trainer, or a member of media, not really understanding that the other portions of who's really kind of deciding and dictating those checks are administrators that you can aspire to. There's no reason why, if I'm a coach or if I'm a player and I'm not having a regular conversation with my AD or the board to really understand how the system works, I'm just a part of, just a part of it. Like, I really don't understand it. And then I'm not fully taking advantage of this opportunity. So I think as coaches, as administrators, and as grassroots leaders, we have to be more understanding of how the system works in totality, not just the competition side. So it's definitely important. Dr. Goodlow.
Yes, sir. I don't even know how I got up here, but I think you're spot on. I think another way to address what you just brought up is we have to also, and I think Coach B said it well, but we also have to get ourselves in the position to flood the pipeline in all of those other areas. And I think a lot of times what happens is, it goes back to what we celebrate. We're going to celebrate LeBron, but do we celebrate the brother with the Washington football team, or do we celebrate, the other GMs and ADs, or like a Kevin Anderson or whomever else is in these positions? And do we know who they are? Do we have access to them? I mean, it's hard for us to push young men and women into those positions when they don't have access to those people. We know that Gene Smith exists, but I could tell my athletes about that all day long, but do they get access to that? There aren't very many for them to access, and I think that we have to do something about that specifically, not only within the HBCUs and the HBHSs and the HB private schools on the youth and secondary levels, but I think we have to do a better job of celebrating the people that are in those spots, and then also sending our children to them and demanding that they control, or not control, but demand that they occupy the space with the same type of courage and tenacity as John Thompson and as Chaney, or as Big House Gaines and the rest of the people who've done those jobs before them.
Thanks, Dr. Goodlow.
Thank you, Dr. Goodlow. I just want to say really quick, one of the things about Coach Thompson, and he made the statement, you make more money sitting down and standing up. But I think one of the things that he really picked up on early, and it further speaks to the depth of his intelligence, is he recognized his uncle as being the first person that people celebrated that wasn't attached to their athletic ability. His uncle was a poet, right? And he talked about just how impactful that vision was to him. And so I think that as he moved through his journey, that was important for him to share with his student athletes, right? And how do we, when you start, I don't want to go down this hole, but when you start to think about issues of racial wealth gap and things like that in this country, you think of all the millionaires that we have who are professional athletes, and the racial wealth gap in this country is as wide as it's been since we were, since slavery ended. So how do we continue to build a conversation around these other positions, right? Now I finished playing, what can I do now, right? How do I get a conversation? How do I get connected to a Junior Bridgman who's an ultra entrepreneur that played in the NBA? We hear about those stories, but how do we, and to Dr. Goodlow's point, how do we gain access to those people to see that it's another way? Because so many kids, in just being from Philadelphia, so many kids think that they're gonna make it on that ball. And a lot of people around them are pushing that narrative. So I think, and I guess I pose this to the panel, like, how do we create and start to show them different options that they can have other than being able to be, because all the kids think they're going Division I, all of them think they're going to be pros, and all of them think they're going to play 20 years in the NBA.
All of them.
Right. But the other part is the parents think it too. Right. The parents, the people around them, the people in the community. So how do we, in our different roles in the ecosystem, start to show them the different options?
I mean, it almost seems like now coaches might have to hold the parents accountable, in some way, shape, or form. But and I know Coach McAdams is on, so I'll just say this: it's amazing that, you know, athletic departments like at UNC probably have about, you know, before the pandemic, maybe 300 employees. You know, University of Texas might have 250, and how little the athletes know about the different positions that are in athletics. You know, how little they know about internal, external operations, about, you know, media, about sports medicine, about all of those different departments. You know, although they interact with these individuals, they really don't have that much of a clue about how, you know, the machine operates. And it is so unfortunate. I think, you know, a few years ago, I really wanted to start like a sport management camp to really get athletes to understand, you know, about that. But then you're fighting this piece that this expectation, you know, that Kyle speaks about everybody thinks that they're going to make it. And the sad thing about it is then once you figure it out that you're not, you know, one of those chosen few, that now you want to go back and get it. Now you want to go back and learn it. And, you know, oftentimes the few opportunities that are there are no longer there for you.
Yeah, and before Coach McAdams jumps, I wanted to build on that to say it's all about the framing, right, Kyle? The whole reason why we did this is because, and Dr. Gill, you said it, right? Who's actually going to read this book from cover to cover and get the lessons rather than, you know, look at the stories of the athletic side that are presented in this book? And that's where it starts. You know, for us in the ecosystem, we really have to challenge and say, if you're truly going to be a coach, you have to be a learner, and you have to be a continuous learner, and really pushing that learning those learning habits down through the ecosystem to the scholars and then to those families. But second thing is, and it'd be a perfect example of when people have read this book, they still are saying this has been a great athletic book, right? And so that tells you already that a lot of our members in the ecosystem truly aren't ready to think outside of athletics because they've been conditioned to only see athletics in one frame. And so we have to continue to push the narrative to say, look, you just can't play the game and not understand how the lights got turned on today. You can't just keep recruiting and offering all these scholarships, not understanding where that money is coming from or who's making those decisions in order for you to continue offering those scholarships. So from a coaching side and a scholar side, you have to continue to ask those questions.
Yeah. No, let me say, because I know Coach McAdams is on, but see, I'm old Coach McAdams, and if I don't say this, I'm gonna forget it. So let me say this. You know, the stuff that's in this book is leadership. And what Coach talks about is leadership. And what I think, you know, at least most of our Black coaches understand, and some of our white coaches, these are the things that makes the difference in your team. See, in my opinion, coaches think, well, I'm gonna run them when they don't remember. I'm gonna run them when they don't do right. We're gonna practice for 6 hours. No, these things that Coach Thompson talks about in his book are the things that I feel, and this is just my opinion, to get your players to play for you. This is what the difference is. And I think that a lot of coaches who have those great teams, who have all those players who don't experience the success that they should, is because they haven't invested in their players and poured in them, like a Big House Gaines, like a John McClendon, like a Coach Thompson. Now, I don't know a lot about the coaching profession, so y'all will have to hit me. You know, from my outside perspective, I think that Coach Cal might be one of those cats. You know, because the thing when Tracy keeps talking about, you know, you make more, what Thompson said about you make more money sitting down than you do standing up. How many of these coaches have come out and said something about the reality that the NCAA canceled the NIL vote? How many? How many have actually came out and said, this is wrong? Like, we're about to put these kids in this bubble. We're about to make all this money from marketing. Yet we're not giving these kids an opportunity when they're clearly entertainers for this 20, 21 season, clearly entertainers. We're not even giving them this opportunity. And I have not heard one coach stand up for these kids because of what Coach Thompson said. You can make more money. You can standing up. I'm sorry, Coach McAdams. Go ahead. I'm man.
No, I love it. I think the word you bring up is leadership. The word I bring up is development. And I think a buzzword right now in college athletics and college administrative speech or jargon right now is development. So you have Power 5 programs who are hiring player development specialists on staffs. There's one in our league in the WAC on the women's side. So the things that we're talking about celebrating in the aspects of Coach Thompson and Coach Chaney and who they were as men in those roles, they were given permission, they were given the opportunity by their administrations to develop their players in other areas and still retain their jobs. When one likes to think win or lose, but Coach Thompson says early in the book that don't get it wrong, that he wanted to win and was expected to win and those sorts of things. But I think right now, unfortunately, what we're going through, unfortunately, in college athletics and as a country, but in college athletics with young people, is administrators the ball's now in the administrator's court, in my opinion. That none of us can turn the other way anymore. That's what's been going on for generations and decades, is that administrations have been saying win at all costs, run them until they do right so that they win us games, and then we succeed as an institution or as a department. And the development side, the non-athlete side of these young people has been cast to the side or has been avoided or ignored for generations. And in my opinion, by the majority of administrations that say, I don't need to know about that. I need the kid to help us win. And, now, even though for another day, another conversation is checking the box of the DEI, but, now there are conversations being had by administrators saying, that Coach or Dr. Gill, you've said before that, one of the biggest shifts will be when administrators recognize that the development side of young athletes and the other aspects of them as human beings, that actually leads to wins more than ignoring it and more than avoiding it. And so the administrators right now, either by force, by, hey, we have suicide issues on our campus, or we don't want to happen to us what happened to that other team in our league, or, whether it's by fear or by, by force, right? Or if it's by choice, like, hey, we've all gone through the pandemic. These kids, they don't even want to walk on the court right now because of what they're dealing with in these ways. And we're going to have to meet them where they're at in these areas if we're going to expect them to come all the way back around to win for our selfish reasons or otherwise. So I just think the administrative aspect of it and the development part, I hope, unfortunately we're where we're at, but I hope that it continues to develop.
Thank you for sharing, Coach.
Thank you, Coach McAdams.
And then just looking at time, man, time flies. And we just want to be mindful of everyone on this Sunday. If you're in the Northeast, you are in the midst of a snowstorm. It has not been fun here in Pennsylvania, seeing all this snow. But Coach Adams, Dr. Gill, give us a closing thought on part 2 of I Came as a Shadow as we wrap up. And again, I thank everyone that attended today. Continue to dive into the text, elevate some, different passages, and really just share with those in your network about the importance of leadership, as Dr. Gill said, or development, as Coach McAdams said, and then even with Coach B, just really that cultural competency. It's very important as we grow the game and as we hope for better for our athletes and coaches. But again, closing thoughts, Dr. Gill, Coach Adams.
I let Doc finish us up, but I think that I marvel at Coach Thompson's his thinking. Like, just he was such a forward thinker. We haven't even talked about the fact that Coach Thompson was the first person to have a woman on the staff. His first hire was Mary Henley. His foresight, and recognizing that he knew he was going to bring student athletes from marginal backgrounds, and he knew that he needed someone that could assist them academically. You know, for him to have the first woman trainer, he just was so forward in his thinking. You know, one of the things that we talked about in our pregame, and I wish we would have gotten to talk about it, Dr. Gill, is how would John Thompson have dealt with everything with COVID, right? What would his thoughts be? What would his motivations be? You know, how would he feel about playing in this? You know, would he play? Would he protest? How would the institution deal with it? You know, but I just, you know, as we always do, I think Tracy touched on it, and it's vitally important as we talk about the theme of leadership, right? Not just as coaches, but leaders, right? And if we're going to have breakthroughs with the people that we lead, it's going to come based on the information that we acquire and what we're reading. And if we can read things, if we can take this text and see it for more than just the wins and the losses, and really extract some things that we can add to our coaching pedagogy and philosophy to really help elevate the student athletes that we're teaching, we gotta be willing to do it. So, and I'm talking to people who are doing it because you're on the call, but I think it's vitally important that we share this text with other people. Everybody that I can, I talk about this book. I bought copies of the book for people. This is one of the most profound texts you can read as a leader, as a coach, and don't hesitate to share it with your network, with the people around you. I yield my time.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of thoughts, right? I mean, you know, I think the world of Kyle, and, you know, I'm just having the pleasure and privilege of working with Tracy, and he's an incredible, you know, young man. But I show up not just for them on these Sundays, but I also show up because this book has just had a profound impact on me. And we say forward thinking, right? But for me, I'm framing it as emotional intelligence, you know, because I know I need to work on mine. You know, I need to work on next month, 6 months, how does it impact this person and that person and not just me? And that's what I took away from the book. And I bought the book for a couple of players. You know, I think that every college athlete this should be required reading for every college athlete, not just Black, not just white, not just male or female, but Hispanic as well. You know, and I signed on a letter to the NCAA saying as much. You know, but I also think it's, you know, it's about, you know, what Kyle said about, you know, perspective and sort of how we frame things. And we've got to figure out different ways to frame this to fit into whatever schema, you know, Dr. Goodlow, whatever schema coaches have, you know, so they will utilize this. You know, I mean, right now it's up on my shelf, you know, with a couple of books of faith, you know, because that's how strongly, you know, I feel about it. And so, you know, I guess, you know, my piece to close today is, you know, sort of how do we go forward, you know, in honoring the legacy, right? I got my jersey behind me. You know, this week was a tough week because it was the week that Kobe passed, you know, but what can we continue to do on a consistent basis, you know, to honor the legacy? And to honor the legacy, we not only have to talk about it, but we got to
be about it. Yeah.
We really do. I mean, you know, the quote that came out by the coach at Baylor, about how kids' girlfriends gonna be leaving them, and whatnot, just for them to be in the bubble. I like to have a few choice words with him. Because it's not just guys that are gonna be guys have lost their families for you to make all this money. And that's the best. I mean, let's just put it this way. If then say you're gonna have a tournament, before the tournament start, everybody got to read John Thompson's book, and you got them there in the bubble so you can sit there and monitor. But my closing thought is that we really have to figure out some ways to put this into action. And I think that Kyle uses the word pedagogy often. It's something that we use in the academy in terms of how we go about teaching. And, I love that perspective in terms of framing it that way. As I interact with coaches now, I'm gonna start asking them, what's your pedagogy? What's your coaching pedagogy? I like to know about it. Parents need to be asking about it. That's the other part. We got to pull some of these parents in. I mean, over COVID, a group was created for college football parents, and a group was created for college basketball parents, and I ain't heard nothing from them outside of a bunch of media and press mention. And there's something wrong with that, because at the end of the day, a lot of these coaches who are not like Coach Thompson and are not like Coach Chaney are treating these kids like they don't have parents. And if you're going to, if that's going to be your approach, then and you're not going to include them, and they're not going to call you, you're not going to have them call you when your kid acting up, then you have to be a better leader, a better developmental specialist for them than some of these coaches that we have doing today. So to close, I'm just really thankful, Kyle and Tracy, for you doing this, Coach B, Coach Goodlow, Coach McAdams, Coach Phillips, for all y'all tuning in. I hope, and I promise you, I'll talk less if y'all call more people in next Sunday, so we can really, really honor Coach Thompson and honor Coach Chaney.
Yes, thank y'all all for attending. Just real quick, we just dropped a link in the chat. Dr. Gill had a recent op-ed, and it talks about just, Kyrie Irving and, some of the mental health aspects of his position as a leader. So definitely check it out. It's in the chat. Want to make sure we, have some other resources for you. We'll email it out to you as well. And there's two things. Last week, we talked about the shaping of John Thompson and the influences that helped him become the man that he is. Part 2 today, we talked more about the becoming and how Coach Thompson accepted that responsibility and knew that it was bigger than just the game. Next week is going to be a dynamic part 3 because it's the juxtaposition. We're talking about now that Coach Thompson, he's built his strong core values. He has reached the mountaintop and won in that championship, and he knows the responsibility that he has with the game. But the Prop 42 come up, the discussion about Nike and that relationship between himself and Nike and what other leaders from the community were asking him to do. And then the romanticized version of the Rayful Edmonds story. We actually get to hear from Coach Thompson on what the actuality of that and nature of that conversation was, and the impact of Rayful in the community, and how Rayful saw Coach Thompson as a pillar, and as a result, what Coach Thompson, the influence he had in that underworld that a lot of times we don't talk about when we're recruiting some of our scholars from these environments, and how Coach Thompson didn't avoid or shy away from it. He knew the environment that these scholars were coming from, and he knew some of the conversations that needed to be had before it took a dark turn for some of his athletes. So part 3 is going to be a very, very special conversation. And before we go, because you brought it up, Coach, Dr. Gilby, I was going to let it go for the day. But because you brought up Coach Scott Drew's comments, I have to read the response of one of the athletes that from Rutgers basketball had said in response to Coach Drew's comment. So for those that don't know, Coach Scott Drew from Baylor says, guys are breaking up with longtime girlfriends to keep the bubble tight and play games. This was a quote that has been publicized on the NCAA's official Instagram page. and on other official publications of, again, we're complimenting and rewarding these scholars for making these tough sacrifices of staying in the bubble just to play. And the player responds to this quote is saying, you realize we are playing in a pandemic, being told to stay away from everyone we love just for y'all entertainment, but I can't sell my own jersey with my last name on it to help my future financially. That makes sense to you? I look forward to having everyone on for part 3. We are going to have 2 more moderators that are going to be joining us next week. Continue the conversation. Look forward to seeing you all next week. Thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate y'all.
Peace.